Hello, everyone. Marianne here with the Sustainable Living Podcast. First, I want to give a huge shout out to our newest Patreon supporter. Her name is Bailey McIntyre, and I hope I'm saying your name right. If you have listened, and I'm assuming you have listened to the show because you choose to support us, you know that I'm notoriously bad with names. And actually, I need to figure out how to do a speak pipe so you guys can call me up and say, that's how you pronounce my name. We are so pleased to have you as part of the Sustainable Living supporter family. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It means a lot. And for those of you who don't know, I'm doing my best to at least every other day. Usually I try to go for once a day, but life sometimes happens and things go crazy. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, right? It's not just me. Tell me it's not just me. Anyways, we're doing little stories on Patreon where you get to see a little bit of my yard and what's going on, like editing. You might see the screen. You might, just things I hope you enjoyed to get a little bit of a glimpse behind the scenes of a podcaster's life and an urban farmer's life, all of that. So thank you, Bailey, for supporting us. We love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Those little clips I was talking about, most of them are exclusive for our patrons, so for people which are supporting us. A few of them are public, but if you're interested, you want to see, you can support us for as little as $1 a month, which, a coffee is more expensive than that, and be part of the group. That's the happy news. Not so happy is that today I was at a funeral of a dear friend of mine. I don't want to go into details right now, but it made me think about that we really need to do a show about funerals and how we can be fulfilling that sustainable lifestyle we are striving to live beyond our death. So if you have experience, if you have somebody you want to direct me to, I would love to get your feedback. Now on to today's show. Today, Emily is bringing you an interview with a female tiny home builder, and she shares her experience from building her first home for herself and how her journey went to now being a professional builder. So women will probably relate to some of the experience she had when she's talking to people about being a builder. Without further ado, here is Emily.
Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Living Podcast. This is Emily Jurdy here today speaking with Isabelle Nagel-Bryce. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Isabelle is a tiny house consultant guiding people through the different phases of their builds. She has put together the Healthy Tiny House Kit, which she offers to DIY and professional builders looking to build a chemical-free and healthy tiny home with continuous fresh air ventilation. Isabelle has also created a website called A Tiny Good Thing, which will be a hub for tiny house building materials and practical goods inside and out. She is passionate about living simply and encouraging others to also have less of an environmental impact. A Tiny Good Thing will only offer products that she strongly believes in, either because she uses them herself daily or has done her own extensive research and believes in representing them. A Tiny Good Thing focus on brands that have integrity and offer a high level of functionality. So as you can see from Isabelle's bio, she is a great fit for our podcast. So welcome again, and let's get started with some questions. So I'd like to know, what is your background? Why did you get into the tiny house life and building a tiny house?
I went to school in Washington State where I created a major that focused on anthropology and permaculture. So basically sustainable living and sustainable agriculture. And then I minored in Spanish, and I'm interested in so many different things. I actually studied to be a midwife for a while and became a doula. And when that path didn't seem like the right one, I moved home back to Colorado just to work and travel for several months. And during that period, I had been already following the tiny house movement for quite some time, but I, just got re-inspired by it, and I got excited by the idea of being able to build myself a house at that time in my life. I've always wanted to build a house. I've always wanted to have land and a homestead, but I didn't think that it was possible basically without any money and on my own. So the tiny house became an option for me because I didn't know where I wanted to live. I had thought about Colorado or moving back to the Pacific Northwest, but I liked the idea of it being mobile and not having to choose right then and there. And I also took the advantage of living at my parents' house for free and being able to build in their backyard. They live on an acre. So I think that that's one of the things that is really challenging for people who want to build a tiny house, is just not having a place to do it. And then, maybe not having the funds because they have to be paying rent. And so I was really fortunate to be able to get a loan for my house and basically work full time while building to pay off my house, but not having to put it towards rent. And I also was able to get my dad really involved. Both my parents thought it was kind of crazy of me to do it, for many reasons. Originally, I had seen a lot of blogs and YouTube videos of people who had built tiny homes with a lot of reclaimed materials, including reclaimed trailers. And maybe at that time, that was a lot of how people were building. But I really wanted to build a house that had structural integrity and that could tow really well. So it was important to me to put it on a trailer that was designed specifically to support a tiny house and to support the weight of the walls and the roof. And then, since I have a background in sustainable living, I had done quite a bit of cob building. I had studied permaculture in Ecuador and Peru, and had done some earthen builds, some straw bale. I had studied earth ships a little bit from afar, and I had worked with Sunray Kelly, who's a natural builder in Washington State. He builds these beautiful, whimsical homes out of cob, and so I had gone out and we had built a living roof on one of his yurts. And so that's sort of the lens that I was coming from. But obviously, you can't build a straw house or a cob house on a trailer. So I was kind of exploring the closest options to that, and to having materials that didn't off-gas chemicals. So I started doing research. I also got certain materials off of Craigslist in the very beginning, which I did use. And that's something that if I did it again, I wouldn't use those materials. We can go into that a little bit later, possibly. But I found a green builder in Colorado who offered products from Europe, and Europe's just miles ahead of the US with chemical-free materials and green building materials in general, and also with building small spaces. And so after talking with him, and so that's Cody Farmer of Mainstream Corporation, we still work very closely together because we designed the Healthy Tiny House kit together. Him and his wife, Lisa Farmer, own Mainstream in Colorado, and they build passive design houses. So the idea is that the house can function really well on its own. So the wall systems are really insulative. They allow moisture to escape. They have continuous ventilation units, and you really don't need much to heat and cool them because of that. So that was really all inspiring to me, because ideally I want to live off the grid and I want to have solar. And so having a house that, doesn't take much to heat and cool, and just functions well as it is, was really inspiring. So I ended up buying a bunch of different materials through them so that I could build a house that would function in any climate. Because if I was going to move back to the Pacific Northwest, I wanted a house that would mitigate mold, because mold is becoming a major issue with tiny homes. And, the stories are just starting to come out of people having to rip out floors, having to rip out ceilings, because they just don't have a wall system that allows the moisture to escape. And what I've learned through working with Mainstream Corporation is that the wall systems in tiny homes are really small. They're 2x4 studs rather than 2x6, and that you also can't add any additional insulation really on the outside of the house because you're trying to maximize your space when you're sticking to the 8.5-foot towing restriction, the width. So we designed a wall system that would allow moisture to escape because you're going to get condensation on the studs no matter what, whether they're wood or steel. And I also put a mineral wool board on the outside of my house that acts similar to a sponge to the moisture. So it's like the analogy that I use is if you wash a plate and you put it on a counter, that water is going to pool and it's going to have nowhere to go. But if you put it on a cloth or a sponge, then that cloth can absorb the moisture and vaporize it. So that's the idea of the exterior house wrap that I now sell through the kit, and also the exterior board that I put on my house. And then I wanted it to function well in a cold climate too, like Colorado. In Colorado or really any high desert climate, and now I'm in the desert in Oregon, you're going to have cold nights and hot days. And so you're going to have a lot of fluctuating temperature on the inside and the outside of your house. And that also causes condensation within your wall systems. A lot of people are lifting up mattresses and they're having mold under their mattresses in their lofts and on windowsills. And I lived in the Pacific Northwest, so I knew what, black mold was like, and I knew what it smelled like and how damaging it can be to your health. So I also was focusing on, not having mold, but also not having chemicals or materials that were off-gassing chemicals into the space. Tiny house is just so small. And it still baffles me today, almost 3 years later, that most tiny house builders are not putting proper ventilation units into the homes. And so another thing that I really push for, and that this is my main forward step in the tiny house movement, is to just get every single builder putting continuous energy recovery ventilation units in. And so we sell some really small units that are perfect for tiny houses and their size, and they're constantly bringing in fresh air and taking it out.
Just curious, is one of those the Lunos?
Yeah,
oh, it is.
so
Okay.
that's the one. So we sell 2 of their products, and right now it's the beginning of the building season, so we have a bunch of kits going out, and depending on the size of the house, we'll pair the units together, or if it's a smaller house, then they can just use one. But they're very efficient. They use less than 1 amp of energy, and they're quiet. And the Lunos Ego you can put in your bathroom, and that just sucks out the air. So you can put it on exhaust mode only, and it replaces the bath fan. So that's a lot of information, but that's my train of thought and where I came from and what has gotten me to where I am today, where I want to represent these different products and change the way that we are building tiny homes. Because I have a natural building background, you think of the life cycle of a house. So not only are you thinking about what materials you are building with and how they will affect the inhabitants of the house, but you're also thinking about when the house is going to be taken down. And, tiny houses, all houses are going to be taken down at some point, whether that's 20 years, 50, or 100. And to me, I wanted to live in a tiny house to have less of an environmental impact and to build with materials that won't go back to the earth or won't be recyclable was really hypocritical to me. I didn't want a spray foamed house where you can't separate the insulation from the studs to go into a landfill. Right. And that's just the perspective that I have because of my background. And so I'm really grateful that my studs are steel studs from Volstruct in Austin. They're an amazing company to work with. And they were able to customize my design with me, which I'll be offering soon on my website. And those studs are completely recyclable. And I also really love that the company itself doesn't have much waste at all. It's just the cutouts for your plumbing and electric and, the little rivet holes that go into the recycling. They recycle that.
Nice.
And then my insulation is biodegradable and VOC free. And then I used a lot of reclaimed materials in my house. I just really have always had an interest in old things, and I love being able to take old materials and give them a new life. So that was very exciting, as well as an opportunity to integrate that into my tiny home.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for all the wonderful information. And I know we struggled with insulation. We taught because we really, really, really wanted to have green insulation. The tricky part is in Minnesota, the requirements to be, I think ours is ANSI certified, or that's what it was built to. We're not actually certified, but they, the requirements in the walls, we would have had to have like 6 inches of wool on each side. And I know there's there's a green option called like aerogel, but that was like $4,000 more or something crazy. So, but when we do it again, or if we do it again, by then, there'll probably be something we can do to still meet those standards and get green. So maybe you already know, I don't know, but yeah, that's always, I love it when people, can do that. And like you said, it's building the home. That's what I love about the way the movement's going, is that builders are starting to talk together and starting to have these conversations about, hey, these people are moving around. So like you said, we need this house to work in, a very humid climate. We need to have it work in a desert climate, a really cold, a really warm. So there's some really great conversations going on in the movement about how to make that happen. So thank you so much for being a part of that conversation. My next question for you is, what would you change about your tiny house, and what would you recommend to people just beginning their build? Actually, let's start with the beginning their build first, and then do what you would change.
Okay, so something that wasn't available to me, I'm going to do a little plug for myself. But,
yeah, go for it.
Something that, there are a lot of kits available now that wasn't available to me when I started. And I had spoken with some builders about building a shell, but it just was really out of my budget. And I also loved the idea of building the house myself, and actually with my dad. So now there's a bunch of different kits available. And I think that if I were starting a build, tomorrow, I would order various kits and pair them together, because the research is done, the materials are there, and you just order them and the quantity arrives that you need. And that just really jumpstarts your build. So like Volstruct in Austin, they offer a tiny house kit, which includes a trailer with a subfloor installed, the studs, all stood up, your whole frame of your house, including, and then it also comes with all of the sheathing that you need. Actually, I think they send it to you panelized with the sheathing that you need. But then if you pair that with like the Healthy Tiny House kit, which includes exterior house wrap, interior wrap, insulation, all the tapes that you need, and then the ventilation unit, all you really need to source yourself, get your house to a dried in state, is your roofing material, whether that's metal or whatnot, and then your windows and your door. And so then you're completely dried in. And I started building in October, and I had to push to get my house dried in before it started snowing in Colorado, because I was building outside on like a horse farm. So that's one thing. I think that there's a lot more realistic resources out there. I was exploring blogs and watching videos of people who they just, they built a tiny house for 15 grand or 11 grand or something like that. And throughout my research, I wanted to build a house that would last, that would function really well. And so my budget basically just increased and increased. And so I think now there's more resources to be aware of how to really come up with a real budget. That's helpful. And then I would recommend to not work full time and build at the same time, because it took me 2.5 years, and just the mental stamina that you have to have and the drive. I mean, to build a tiny house, it's a million tiny projects in one big project. And so I recommend that people figure it out, take out a bigger loan or save up, and then be able to take off like 6 months or 8 months and just bang it out. Because I think just for like your sanity, that would be really smart.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, get a tribe together of people who can, but then you're telling them how to do it and all that stuff.
Right. But I mean, I definitely had work parties too, and that's really amazing if you can get your friends and family and people around you to join in, because I don't think they even know how valuable their support and their help can be, because even if they're just painting like one cabinet door or putting in a little bit of insulation, that just adds up, and it just takes a lot of the work off of the build for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. And then, okay, so what would I change about my house? Well, right now I'm redlining my designs with Volstruct, and I'm modifying a few things um, to make a better build for the next person.
Mm-hmm.
So, to be honest, as an amateur designer and builder, I made a few mistakes. I would say, which I'm not shy to share. My kitchen and bathroom windows I designed them too low. So when I got my framing up, I realized that they were too low to like look out of, basically, like, a little bit. So we actually raised them up with wood, and so that's something that I'm fixing. The other thing is, from towing it from Colorado to Oregon last month, it's a little bit back heavy, so I'm adjusting my design for that. But other than that, I am very happy with my house. And it's become such a sanctuary for me, and everything that's in here, you know, I've built it. I love it, and it makes me feel really comfortable and safe, and it's very clean and fresh in here, and it's somewhere that I want to spend a lot of time. So sometimes it's hard to go out and meet people because I'm so happy and comfortable in my house. But yeah, honestly, I'm really grateful and really happy with how it came out. And there isn't really one thing that's bothering me, every day about it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from my perspective, like even like there's some things in our tiny house will eventually change. And I mean, we started our build in August of 2015. So it was like, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there, and,
Yeah,
not a whole lot of regulation. And there was just like, wow, what do we do? And ours being built by a builder, we did have support, but again, it was just so new. But it's so interesting because the beauty of tiny homes is that you can make those adjustments rather easily, especially since it is made out like a home. So, you can even hire out, like for us, like we have no skills for that. So we could even hire a regular home builder if we want to put in the Lunos, since that wasn't even like a thing when we were building. So, that's the great thing of tiny homes, is that, they are easily adjustable, versus our camper is like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't, it's so cheaply made that if we tried to fix it, it would just fall apart more. So it's like,
definitely. Yeah. And another thing that I've noticed just from living in my house is that having a deck makes your living experience so much better.
mm-hmm.
So so maybe I would want to add one of those like folding up decks, and maybe a porch roof that folds down or something like that. Although my house is at maximum width, so I can't really add that. But once I'm in a more permanent spot, I'll build a deck, and I just think it's really nice to be able to walk like basically straight out of your house rather than down several steps and into the dirt, to the ground or grass or whatever. Um, and just to bring yourself outside of the house and have more living space is really nice.
Oh, I can definitely attest to that. We have only had stairs, and I can't tell you how many times I've like fallen because I'm like trying to open the door and step down and bring the groceries in, and I'm always like, I can't do it.
Yeah, and like in the snow and everything. Yeah.
Awesome. So, as a young female builder and entrepreneur, what are some barriers you've come across, and how have you sort of overcome some of those barriers? And if you haven't overcome them, what's kind of your goal?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that being a young female who's building something, you actually are confronted with that pretty much every time that you go to like a hardware store or a lumber yard, or any time that you're talking to someone on the phone. It's a very male dominated industry, and I think that a lot of people don't understand that women can build too. Or it's not that they can't wrap their head around it. It's just not the first. It's not the first thing they think of. I mean, even just the other day, I was talking to a couple, and I told them that I built my tiny house, and I showed them a photo, and the man said, "So who built it for you?" And I said, no, I built it. And, and he was like, well, who helped you, you know? And you had a builder, right? You just like designed it. And like he just like wasn't understanding it. And I ended up saying it about 4 different times that I built it, that I did have help from my dad, you know. And by the time that he like understood that I built it, but then when we were talking that, you know, it was a father-daughter project, he was like, oh, okay, of course. Like you were able to build it because you had your dad. And that is something that I'm not negating the fact that I totally took advantage of my dad's height at times, my dad's, you know, ability to muscle things in when you're building with steel framing. Sometimes you have to muscle in screws into the steel studs. Like I know, you know, that men have different attributes than women, but I've also had men ask me, you know, that my hands look too soft to have built this house. And there's just so many funny things that I run into all the time, but a lot of it is going to the hardware store and having to explain myself over and over what I want, or people are bringing me to the wrong aisle because they don't think that I'm actually looking for an electrical box that for a new construction. And so just little things that are frustrating like that. And then now I'm moving into this realm where I'm a source of information and a source of knowledge for future builders, rather whether they're DIY builders or professional. And I definitely notice that I have to I don't I have to be more direct, and I have to kind of change the way that I interact with certain people to be taken seriously.
Right.
And a lot of the time it's almost hard to explain. It's just a general feeling of not really being taken seriously. So I do think though that there are more women who are doing this, and there's amazing women who have built their house by themselves, single mothers who have built their house by themselves, or retired women. And those stories are so inspiring, because I know, especially when you don't have a second hand, it can be really, really difficult. And then as an entrepreneur, you know, I am pretty small right now. Tiny Good Thing is quite tiny, but we're moving in a direction where, you know, the website is going to be a source for information. I'm going to be posting blogs and getting other people who are knowledgeable about green building or the tiny house movement to be posting blogs. And then also all of the materials and products on there are going to be really high functioning products, you know, like something that I'm going to have on my site is the tiny bathtub that I took so long to find, probably a year and a half. And I ordered 3 different bathtubs, and I explored all the different ideas, you know, horse trough, wheelbarrow, you know, whatever. And that's a product that I think it is really durable, and I think that it's really perfect for a tiny house. A lot of tiny houses are having issues with shower pans cracking. And then the water is going into the subfloor, and then it's molding because it has no way to escape, and they're having to rip out the floors. So, you know, I've heard of that happening 6 different times now. And so having a bathtub, you know, it's great to have a bathtub. I can wash my dog in there, but it also takes away that possibility from happening. So things like that. But I haven't really I would say I haven't really encountered the difficulties of being a female entrepreneur yet, because we're kind of just starting out.
We will hopefully be able to help you with that.
Yeah.
Before we mention all your amazing websites, I would like to close up with kind of just your last words of wisdom. As being a sustainable living podcast, thank you so much for sharing all that wisdom and all those sustainable options. And of course, everyone will have links to your website so they can even dive deeper. And as far as, you know, last words of wisdom for people who are kind of like, okay, I'm really interested in doing a tiny house. I want it to be clean and green and non-toxic. What are kind of just some last words of wisdoms for them? Maybe kind of things that are the most important to get green, or how they can just best build their tiny house to be safe and sustainable.
So I think something that has been really valuable for me through this process is my ability and also my interest in research. And so I really recommend that everyone researches everything because, we were talking about insulation, for example, and you have a lot of pros and cons that you have to weigh throughout the process of building a tiny home or even buying a tiny home from a builder, of the demand to build with healthy materials that are healthy for the environment and for yourself living amongst them. The more demand there is for that, then the more builders who will jump on board. And so I really recommend, while you're doing your research, to try and not be solely focused on yourself and how the build is going to work out for you, but also take into consideration how it's going to affect the earth and how it's going to affect the earth in the future when it's taken apart, and how it's going to affect the earth when it's being built. And so just take all of those factors into consideration while you're weighing your pros and cons for each and every material and choice that you make for the house. And I know that that can be a lot of work, and that can be a lot to put on your shoulders, but that's where we're at, with climate change and with the materials that are available to us. But I just want people to know that there are alternatives, and there are people out there seeking those and sharing their experience and their knowledge. So find them.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And now that's a perfect segue because we have some places you can find all these things. So where can people find you online?
So my website is atinygoodthing.com, and it will be fully up and running in about a month. Right now it's a blog with great information about my build and why to build a healthy tiny house. And also my Instagram account, which is at a tiny good thing. I post different photos on there of my build and also other builds that are inspiring to me. I'm going to be posting more about people who are just starting out their build this year using the Healthy Tiny House Kit and how that's going for them.
Oh,
So I'm very excited about that. And you can email me at atinygoodthing@gmail.com if you have any questions.
oh, wonderful. And we have the YouTube video we will link here
Great, thank
in an
you.
article from the HomeLink magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, thank you so much for moving this green, sustainable tiny house movement forward. And we look forward to having you on again, and we can chat more about green living and tiny houses.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy that Emily is on the show more and brings her expertise about tiny home living and especially her passion about it to this show. She was just at the Colorado Tiny Home Festival, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that more too. It is such a timely topic. Here in San Diego, the median home price is high. I don't know the exact figures, but I know the figure is called unaffordable for most people. It's really crazy. We have tons and tons of homelessness here. And really, many people think about homeless, as that picture you see on the street of the down and out person. But a lot of the homeless in San Diego are families, are people which actually are holding jobs, but they are not making enough money to buy food and pay for rent. So it is really a big problem here. And I think we're not the only city and the only place which is dealing with that. Tiny house living just seems like such an answer for so many of that kind of difficulties people are facing. We all know that without shelter, life is just so much more difficult. I'm excited. I hope you're excited to find out more about the tiny home movement, so many intricacies, the things to educate ourselves about. And hearing from builders, I think, is so eye opening because you hear people spend a lot of time on projects. And I'm not just talking about tiny homes, and I'm a really good example of that, of reading about a project, being excited, doing a fair amount of research. But let's remember, a lot of the things we find online, sometimes theory, sometimes kind of honey-coated, I think that's the right word, or not quite telling the whole story. So things might seem a lot easier than we think it is. And it's so nice to get step by step. This is what you need to look out for. From my experience, this works. Like having a porch on the tiny home is an important thing. Apparently, I haven't lived in one, but it makes complete sense to me. So let us know what you think. You can reach us via email, sustainablelivingpodcast@gmail.com. We are on Facebook. There's a Facebook group. Everything we are is called Sustainable Living Podcast. Besides on Steemit, it's Sustainable Living without the G. I only got 16 characters for the account. And steemit.com, it's a social media platform I took quite a bit about, where you actually can earn cryptocurrency by blogging. Join us. I would love to see you there. I'm also there under Marianne West. Let us know what you think. And of course, we're on Patreon too. So Sustainable Living Podcast. And look for the little clips. And I also post little sewed pieces there once in a while. Not very often, to be honest, once in a while. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.